I should have known. The signs were all there, subtle at first, tiny cracks in the facade of my perfect world. But I didn't see them. Not until it was too late. I was married to Emily, the love of my life. We had built a solid home together, a family of 3. Our daughter, Lily, was 8, the heart of our lives. Emily and I had been through everything together, the ups and downs, the laughs and tears. I thought we were invincible. That was before the silence started creeping in. It began with small things. Emily being a little too tired to talk at night, spending hours on her phone with the door closed. Her once affectionate gestures turned into fleeting moments, and I chalked it up to stress. She was busy with work, trying to balance her career with being a mother. I told myself that was it. Work had drained her. It wasn't like the past, where we could talk for hours about anything and everything. No, it was just a phase. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And then, one evening, everything changed. I was home early from work. A rare occurrence. Lily was at a friend's house, and Emily had promised she would be home early to make dinner. I had no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. But as I entered the house, a strange feeling washed over me. I couldn't place it, just an unsettling weight in the air. I found her in the living room, staring at her phone, her face illuminated by the screen. It wasn't the phone that bothered me, it was the way she jumped when I walked in. Her eyes wide, guilty. She quickly closed the screen and looked at me with that fake smile I knew too well. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile, trying to mask my growing suspicions. "Hi," she replied, her voice tight, too light. I couldn't read her, but I didn't like what I was feeling. "Is everything okay?" I asked. It felt like an odd question, but I had to ask it. Her behavior was off. "Yeah, of course," she replied, her tone too quick, too rehearsed. "Just tired, I guess." We sat in silence for a moment, the awkwardness thick between us. The weight of unspoken words felt heavier than ever. But then, just as I was about to speak again, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere between us. I opened the door, and there stood Ben, our neighbor. I didn't expect him, but I welcomed the distraction. He had been a good friend for years, close, trusted. But what happened next shattered everything I thought I knew. "Hey, man," he said with a nervous smile, but it faltered when his eyes met mine. There was something off about his expression, something I couldn't place, but it made the pit in my stomach grow deeper. Before I could ask what brought him over, he stammered. "I need to talk to you. It's about Emily." His voice trembled slightly, and I immediately felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my pulse quickening. The way he said her name, the unease in his voice, it didn't sit right with me. Ben hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the living room before returning to me. "Look, I don't want to say anything here, but you need to know something." My heart began to race as he stepped inside, the tension building with every word. Emily came into the hallway, her face pale now, and I saw the truth flash across her eyes in that instant. I knew then. I didn't need Ben to say another word. My world was crashing down, and the man standing in front of me was a witness to the betrayal. I turned to Emily, my voice barely a whisper. "What's going on?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I felt my blood run cold as I realized what had been happening right under my nose. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the moment pressed down on my chest like 1,000 tons, suffocating me. Ben's presence, though comforting at first, now felt like an indictment. Emily's eyes were locked on mine, and I saw it all in the flicker of her gaze, the fear, the guilt, the shame. It was as if she was already apologizing, but there was nothing she could say that would make this right. Ben stepped forward, his posture rigid. "I didn't want to get involved," he began, his voice shaky. "But I can't keep this from you. It's not right." "What the hell is going on?" I managed to croak, my throat tightening. My voice was barely my own. Ben glanced at Emily again, as if silently asking for permission, but she said nothing. She just stood there, pale, her lips pressed tightly together. And that silence spoke volumes. Ben cleared his throat. It's about Jack. The name hit me like a slap to the face. Jack. My best friend. My brother in every way that mattered. I had known him for years. We'd gone through everything together: breakups, career changes, our kids growing up side by side. Jack and I had been inseparable, always relying on each other. But now, the name sounded like a betrayal on its own. Jack? I whispered, as if saying his name might make this all go away. What about Jack? Ben hesitated, his eyes darting toward Emily, who still stood motionless, her shoulders hunched as though trying to disappear into the walls. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he said, his voice cracking. But I've seen them together, man. And I'm sorry, I didn't want to be the one to tell you. But you need to know the truth. I felt my knees give way, but I forced myself to stand tall. Tell me everything, I demanded, though my voice was no more than a hoarse whisper. Jack and Emily, Ben finally said, his voice barely audible. They've been involved. For months. I don't know all the details, but I've seen the way they've been sneaking around. I didn't want to say anything, but when I saw you come home today, I just couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I turned toward Emily. She had tears streaming down her face now, her hands shaking as she clasped them tightly together in front of her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Emily, I choked out. Is it true? Her silence was louder than any confession could have been. It was as if time stopped. The world around me blurred, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Finally she spoke, her voice small, barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen, Chris. I swear I didn't. It just did. I closed my eyes, the tears stinging at the corners. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't process the reality of what she had just said. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Why? The question escaped me before I could stop it, and my voice cracked as I spoke the word that would haunt me forever. Why, Emily? Why him? She shook her head, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears away. I don't know. I don't know. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I couldn't stop myself. The room was silent except for the sound of her sobs. I looked at Ben, his face twisted in guilt, but I didn't care about him right now. He wasn't the one who had broken me. It was her. It was Emily. The woman I had built my entire world around. Get out, I whispered, my voice barely audible, though it felt like it echoed throughout the entire room. Ben froze, clearly shocked by the venom in my words. Chris, I said get out. I repeated, my voice rising, the words burning as they left my mouth. Now. He didn't argue. Without another word, Ben turned and walked out of the house, leaving me alone with Emily, with the devastation that had been carefully constructed behind closed doors. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unsure if I could even breathe. My body felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. The room was cold, and my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to run away and never look back. But above all, I wanted to understand. I needed to know how this had happened. How everything we had built could come crashing down in the blink of an eye. I took a deep breath and faced Emily, who stood motionless, her face streaked with tears. How long? I asked, the question barely escaping my lips. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. A few months, she admitted, her voice small. It started after you went on that business trip last fall. We started talking, and it just escalated. I staggered back, the words hitting me like physical blows. Jack, I muttered. My best friend. I'm so sorry, she whispered, but the words felt empty. She was sorry? Sorry? That didn't change anything. Sorry wouldn't fix the damage, the lies, the shattered trust. Sorry wouldn't bring back the life we had. You've destroyed everything, Emily. My voice was cold, the anger now rising like a tidal wave, drowning out everything else. You've torn apart this family. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to us? I didn't mean to, she sobbed. I never meant for it to go this far. Stop, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't give me excuses. I don't want to hear them. She took a step forward, but I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. No. You don't get to explain this away. You've already made your choice. The weight of the room pressed down on us both. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, the rage and heartbreak threatening to consume me. But there was something else too, something I hadn't expected. A strange sense of cold clarity. I wasn't just angry. I was done. The silence that followed felt like a lifetime. Emily's sobs were the only sound, but they were distant, muffled, like they belonged to someone else. She looked up at me, her tear-filled eyes pleading for understanding, for forgiveness that I knew I couldn't give. Not right now. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and confusion. Everything I thought I knew had been flipped upside down. The life we had shared, the memories, the laughter, the trust, now felt like a lie. I had been living in a world built on a foundation that wasn't real. I never wanted to hurt you, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. I never wanted to destroy everything. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. I couldn't look at her anymore. I turned away, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. The rage burned in my chest, but there was something else, something colder. A numbness that made the anger seem distant, almost secondary. What had I been fighting for? A family that was already broken. I want you to leave, I said, my voice firm, cutting through the tension in the air. I need some space. I can't. I stopped myself, my throat tightening. I couldn't say it. I couldn't admit that everything I thought was real had been ripped away from me. But I needed to. Emily didn't protest. She didn't argue. She just nodded, her shoulders sagging with defeat. As she walked toward the door, she glanced back once, her eyes filled with pain. But it wasn't the pain of someone who had been wronged. It was the pain of someone who knew they had destroyed something irreplaceable. And in that moment I realized that this was bigger than just Emily and me. This was about the betrayal of a friendship, of trust. My life, the life I had built, had been shattered, not just by her, but by Jack too. The door closed behind Emily, and I stood in the silence of our empty house. The air felt thick with the weight of what had just happened. I couldn't stay in this house, not now, not with the memories of everything we had shared suffocating me. I needed to escape. I grabbed my jacket and walked out, my footsteps heavy, as if the weight of everything was pressing me down with each step. I wasn't even sure where I was going. I just needed to move. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face when I stepped outside. It was the kind of night where everything felt sharp, the crispness of the wind, the stillness of the streets. The quiet was overwhelming, but it gave me room to think. I had to think. I couldn't let the chaos of my emotions control me. Not now. Not when there was so much at stake. As I walked aimlessly through the streets, I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind. Jack. My best friend. How had he been able to look me in the eye every single day, knowing what he was doing? How could he betray me like this? How could both of them betray me? I thought back to the moments of our friendship, the nights we'd spent together, the secrets shared, the times he'd been there for me when I needed him the most. And now, it felt like all of that had been a lie. Was it all just an illusion? Had I been so blind? I stopped walking and leaned against a lamppost, staring at the ground as my breath came in sharp bursts. I needed answers. I needed to understand. But part of me didn't even know where to start. How do you begin to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered by the two people you trusted the most? My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I fished it out, hoping for some sign of clarity, but instead, I saw the name that made my blood run cold, Jack. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button. I could feel my pulse in my temples. Did I even want to hear what he had to say? Could I ever trust him again? Against my better judgment, I answered. Chris. Jack's voice came through, his tone strained. We need to talk. Talk? I repeated, incredulous. What do we have to talk about, Jack? You've already said everything by your actions. There was a long pause on the other end, as if Jack was trying to figure out how to approach the situation without making it worse. I know you're angry, he said quietly. I get it. But I need you to hear me out. Please. I never meant for any of this to happen. You never meant for it to happen? I spat, the words slipping out before I could stop them. You betrayed me, Jack. You betrayed my friendship, my trust. And now you want me to hear you out? What could you possibly say that would make this right? Jack stopped himself, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say. I don't want to lose you, Chris. Not over this. I felt a strange, bitter laugh rise in my chest. You don't get to choose what you lose, Jack. Not after what you've done. You both crossed a line. I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm still the same person, Chris, Jack said quickly. This wasn't supposed to happen. Emily and we didn't plan it. It just happened. But I swear I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted to destroy everything. You already have, I said, my voice cold and final. You've destroyed everything. I don't know how you thought this would end, but now, all I can see is the destruction you've left in your wake. Please, Chris. I'm sorry, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry for everything. I've made a huge mistake, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. I'll make it right. Just please, don't shut me out. I felt the anger surge again, like a tide rising within me. You think you can fix this? You think saying sorry is enough? I shook my head, my fists clenching at my sides. There's no going back, Jack. Not for me. Not for us. And with that I hung up. The cold air burned my lungs as I stood there, fighting to control my emotions. Part of me wanted to scream, to find him and confront him face to face. But the other part of me, the part that was slowly, painfully breaking apart, knew this wasn't something that could be fixed with words. This was something deeper. A betrayal that went beyond what either of us could repair. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know if I even wanted to try. The night stretched long and cold, but the storm inside me was colder. I wanted the empty streets, my mind burning with betrayal. Emily's lies. Jack's cowardice. My so-called best friend, the man I had trusted with everything, sneaking behind my back with my wife. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-scale invasion of my life, a mockery of everything I had built. I could see them in my mind, laughing at me in the dark, sharing whispers behind my back, thinking they were so clever. No. They weren't going to walk away from this unscathed. By the time I reached home, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't going to end with me curled up in bed, drowning in self-pity while they got to live freely. I wasn't just going to accept this. They had broken me, now, I would break them. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Chris? A groggy voice answered. Do you know what time it is? David, I said, my voice sharp. I need you. A pause. Then, more awake. What happened? My wife cheated on me. With Jack. There was a long silence, followed by a low whistle. Jack? You're Jack? Yeah. David let out a slow breath. I'm coming over. I hung up and sat in the dimly lit living room, my leg bouncing with nervous energy. David wasn't just my cousin, he was my oldest friend. The one person who had always had my back, no matter what. 20 minutes later, headlights flashed outside. A few seconds later, David walked in, looking tired but alert. Tell me everything, he said, dropping onto the couch across from me. I did. Every word burned as I spoke them aloud. David listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You want revenge, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I don't want them to just get away with this, David. They don't get to ruin my life and keep theirs intact. David smirked, but there was no humor in it. Good. Because I have an idea. I raised an eyebrow. Go on. David leaned back, his mind already working. Jack's married to Lisa, right? Lisa. My friend. Jack's wife. She had no idea. The thought made my stomach turn. She doesn't know. I muttered. David's smirk widened. Well, she should. I inhaled sharply. Of course. Lisa deserved the truth just as much as I did. Jack thought he was clever, sneaking around behind my back? Let's see how he liked it when his own life blew up in his face. David continued. First, we expose them. No yelling, no fighting, we make sure everyone knows. Lisa, our friends, Emily's family. They need to feel the weight of what they did. I nodded. And then? David's grin turned sharp. Then, we make sure they lose everything. Jack was a well-respected businessman. His reputation was built on trust, on being the good guy. What would happen if the world saw him for what he really was? And Emily? She was about to learn what it felt like to be discarded. Are you in? David asked, his eyes locked onto mine. I thought of Jack's betrayal. Emily's lies. My broken home. I clenched my jaw. I'm in. And just like that, the plan for revenge was set in motion. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. There was no grief weighing me down, no self-pity chaining me to my bed. Instead, there was a cold, razor-sharp clarity. Emily and Jack had torn my life apart, but they had no idea what was coming for them. David was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. His eyes were alert, focused. The kind of look he got when he was working on something important. You ready? He asked without looking up. Yeah, I said, grabbing a coffee. Where do we start? David turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was Lisa's social media profile, Jack's wife. She looked happy, blissfully unaware that her husband had betrayed her with my wife. We tell her, David said. Today. I swallowed hard. Lisa didn't deserve this. But neither did I. And if the roles were reversed, I'd want to know. David pulled up a folder labeled Evidence. Screenshots of Emily and Jack's texts. A photo Ben had taken of them meeting at a hotel. The truth was all there, in undeniable detail. How do we do it? I asked. David smirked. We go old school. Anonymous delivery. Within an hour, we had printed everything and placed it in an envelope. No note, no explanation, just cold, hard proof. We drove to Lisa's house, and while David kept the engine running, I walked up to her door and slipped the envelope into her mailbox. As I walked back to the car, my pulse was racing. It's done! David grinned. And now we wait. We didn't have to wait long. That evening, Jack called. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice calm. Jack! What the hell did you do? He barked, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. I smirked. Oh, you got my little gift? You had no right. I had every right. I cut him off, my tone dropping into something cold, almost dangerous. You had an affair with my wife. You betrayed me, Jack. And now? You get to deal with the consequences. I could hear his breathing, heavy and erratic. Lisa left, he admitted after a long pause. She took the kids. She won't even talk to me. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not one bit. Good. You deserve worse. You think this makes us even? Jack growled. I laughed, a humorless sound. Oh, Jack. We're just getting started. I hung up before he could say another word. David, sitting across from me, chuckled. That was satisfying. Yeah, I said, exhaling slowly. But we're not done yet. Emily was next. Jack was unraveling, and that was satisfying, but he wasn't the only one who needed to feel the weight of their betrayal. Emily had gotten off too easy. She had wept, she had begged, she had said all the things a guilty person says when they're caught, but none of that meant she had suffered the way I had. That was about to change. David leaned forward, resting his elbows on the kitchen table, his eyes sharp with interest. So what's next? Jack's world is burning, but Emily's still walking free. You ready to fix that? I exhaled slowly, then nodded. Yeah. It's time. David smirked. Good. Because I have an idea. He turned his laptop toward me again, and this time, I saw something that made my blood run hot with a dark satisfaction. Emily was looking for a new job. After our confrontation, she had moved out and had been trying to get her life together. But the corporate world was small, and her reputation as a trustworthy professional was everything. David had found her updated resume online, along with applications she had sent to several firms. One of them? A place where I had connections. You thinking what I'm thinking? David asked, raising an eyebrow. I smiled. Oh, absolutely. 2 days later, Emily got an interview. I had been waiting for this moment, and with one quick call to an old friend in the company, the wheels were in motion. Chris, Mark, the hiring manager, greeted me warmly over the phone. Long time no talk. What's up? Hey, Mark, I said casually. Listen, I just wanted to give you a heads up about something. You've got an applicant, Emily Carter. Mark hesitated. Yeah, we do. You know her? Oh, I know her, I said, my voice cool. I just thought you should know what kind of person you're dealing with. I didn't need to say much more. The corporate world thrives on trust and reputation. Emily had built hers carefully, but I was about to shatter it. By the time the interview came, Emily walked in thinking she had a fresh start. She walked out with nothing. That evening, my phone buzzed. Emily. I let it ring twice before answering. Chris, she breathed, her voice strained. Did you say something to Mark Dawson? I leaned back in my chair. Why do you ask? She hesitated. I had an interview today. It was going well. And then suddenly, I could feel it shift. He knew something. And I know you know him. I didn't deny it. Emily, actions have consequences. You burned our life to the ground, and now? You get to live in the ashes. She made a choke sound, as if she was on the verge of crying. Chris, I'm sorry. I've said I'm sorry. I never meant. You did mean it. I interrupted, my voice cold. You meant it every time you snuck around with Jack. Every time you lied to me. You meant it when you destroyed our family. So don't tell me you never meant to do this. Silence. Then, a shaky breath. Is this what you want? She whispered. To ruin me? I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Did I want that? I wanted her to understand. To feel what I had felt. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to. But I wasn't done yet. Emily, I said quietly, this is just the beginning. And I hung up. Emily was crumbling. Jack had lost his family, and now Emily was losing her career. But it still wasn't enough. I didn't just want them to hurt. I wanted them to feel the helplessness I had felt. To lose control over their own lives the way they had stolen mine out from under me. And I had one last move to play. David sat across from me, sipping his coffee. You sure you want to keep going? He asked. She's already in freefall. She can't get a job, her friends are turning on her, she's losing Chris. I stared at my hands, considering. Not enough, I murmured. David grinned. That's what I wanted to hear. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it, my stomach tightening with satisfaction. It contained financial records, Emily's. She was drowning in debt. After moving out, she had been struggling to keep up with rent, bills, and the life she had taken for granted when we were together. She had drained her savings, was months behind on payments, and, most interestingly, she had reached out to Jack for financial help. David tapped the paper. Guess what? He turned her down. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Oh yeah, David said, smirking. Looks like the love affair isn't so convenient for him anymore. Lisa took the kids and froze their joint accounts. Jack's barely keeping his own life together. He's not about to bankroll his mistress. That was perfect. Emily had thrown away her family for Jack, and now Jack had thrown her away. Karma. Still, I wasn't done. She still has her car, right? I asked. David grinned. She did, until this morning. I blinked. What do you mean? He leaned back in his chair. I may or may not have tipped off her lender that she wasn't making payments. You know how these banks are, always so eager to repossess. I let out a low whistle. You're ruthless. David shrugged. She deserves worse. I didn't disagree. That night, my phone rang. Emily. Again. This time I answered. Her voice was raw, desperate. Chris. Please. I have nothing left. I didn't respond. My car's gone. My credit is trashed. I can't get a job because of you. I don't even have anywhere to stay after this month. She sniffled. I made a mistake. I know I did. But you're destroying me. I should have felt guilty. Maybe the old me would have. But all I felt was the cold, simple truth: she deserved it. You destroyed yourself, I said quietly. I just made sure you felt it. A long silence. Then she asked, Do you hate me? I thought about that. I had spent so much time being angry, planning my revenge, watching her and Jack's world crumble piece by piece. But did I hate her? I took a breath. No, I admitted. I don't hate you. I just don't care anymore. And I meant it. She made a strangled noise, something between a sob and a breath. Chris. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. Goodbye, Emily. I hung up. And for the first time in months, I felt free. Emily was done. Jack was done. Everything they had built together, the lies, the secrecy, the fantasy, had collapsed into ruin. And I should have felt satisfied. But there was still one thing left. I needed closure. I wasn't naive enough to think I would ever forgive them. But I needed to stand in front of them one last time and see, with my own eyes, what they had become. And I wanted them to see me, not broken, not defeated, but standing tall, stronger than before. David, ever the strategist, smirked when I told him my plan. You want them both in the same place? I nodded. He grinned. I think I know how to make that happen. Jack's life was in shambles. Lisa had left him. His reputation was in tatters. His company had started distancing itself from him. Turns out, even in the corporate world, cheating on your wife with your best friend's spouse wasn't a great look. And Emily? She was barely surviving. So when David, using a fake number, sent each of them a message pretending to be the other, asking to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, they both jumped at the chance. They were desperate. They probably thought they could still fix things. They were wrong. I arrived at the cafe first, taking a seat in the corner, out of sight. David sat at another table, pretending to read a newspaper but watching everything unfold. Jack walked in first. He looked exhausted, worn down by the consequences of his own choices. He glanced around, clearly expecting Emily. And then she walked in. Her hair was messy. Her clothes weren't as pristine as they used to be. She looked lost. They saw each other. Confusion flickered across their faces, quickly replaced by something else: hope. But before they could speak, I stood up. Jack turned, his face paling the moment he saw me. Emily's lips parted slightly, her breath hitching. Either of them spoke. I walked toward their table and sat down. Go ahead, I said, folding my hands in front of me. Talk. You both came here for each other, didn't you? Jack swallowed hard. Chris, what is this? I tilted my head. Closure. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the table. Chris, please. I held up a hand. No. You don't get to beg. You don't get to explain. You chose this. Both of you did. Jack sighed, rubbing his face. Look, man. Don't. I cut him off. Don't call me man. Don't act like we're friends. He fell silent. I exhaled slowly. I just wanted to see you both one last time. See what's left of you now that you don't have me, or Lisa, or our families covering for you. Emily bit her lip. Chris, I never wanted. I leaned in, my voice dangerously quiet. You wanted everything you did. You chose every moment. And now? You live with it. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. I stood up, placing a few bills on the table. For the coffee, I said dryly. Since neither of you can afford it anymore. Jack clenched his jaw. You think you won? I looked down at him, at the shell of the man who had once been my best friend. I didn't win, Jack, I said. But I didn't lose either. And with that I turned and walked out, leaving them to sit in the wreckage they had created. I didn't need revenge anymore. I already had everything I needed. I walked out of that cafe feeling lighter than I had in months. No more anger weighing me down. No more obsession with revenge. Jack and Emily were nothing to me now. Just two people who had ruined their own lives. David met me outside, hands in his pockets, watching me carefully. Well? He asked. Did it feel good? I thought about it for a second, then nodded. Yeah. It did. David smirked. Good. Because I think we're officially done here. I exhaled slowly, taking in the cold air. We were done. Jack had lost everything. His wife. His kids. His career. Emily had nothing. No job, no support, no future. And me? I was free. A few days passed. Then a few weeks. Life slowly started to return to normal, except this time, it was my normal, not the life I had shared with Emily. I focused on work. I spent more time with friends who actually cared about me. I started running again, something I had let slip during the chaos. I even started seeing someone. Nothing serious, just easy conversation and laughter over dinner. It felt good. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from Lisa. Lisa, can we talk? I hesitated for a moment, then replied. Me, yeah? Let's meet up. Lisa deserved better than the mess she had been dragged into. Maybe, just maybe, we could help each other heal. One night, as I was locking up my house, my phone buzzed. Emily. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. Her voice was quiet, small. Chris. I didn't say anything. I just wanted to say I understand now. She whispered. What I did. What I lost. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. I thought about all the ways I could respond. But in the end I just said, Goodbye, Emily. And I hung up. For the final time. I walked out of that cafe feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not happiness, not triumph, but the quiet realization that I was finally done. Jack and Emily had made their choices, and they had lost everything because of them. I had nothing left to prove. Nothing left to destroy. And for the first time, I could see the future without them in it. David met me outside, leaning against his car with a satisfied smirk. That looked brutal. I nodded. It was necessary. He chuckled. I almost feel bad for them. Almost. I let out a breath. Let's go. We drove in silence, and as we passed the streets I once knew so well, I realized something. My life wasn't over. It had felt like it was for a while, like everything I had built had been stripped away. But I was still here. I still had a future. And I wasn't going to waste it by looking back anymore. A week later, I finalized the last step of my closure, filing for divorce. I didn't even meet Emily in person for it. Our lawyers handled everything. She didn't contest it. She knew there was nothing left to fight for. When the papers were signed, I got a single text from her. Emily, I understand. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. That chapter of my life was closed. I thought about them less and less as time passed. Emily moved away. I heard through mutual friends that she had taken a lower-paying job in another city. She was alone. Jack, too, had disappeared from our old social circles. Lisa and I kept in touch. She had found her own way forward, raising her kids with grace and strength. We never talked about Jack or Emily anymore. We didn't need to. As for me, I rebuilt. I focused on my career, my passions, myself. I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. I found laughter again in places I never thought I would. And one day, I met someone new. It wasn't instant. I wasn't looking for love. But it found me anyway. And this time, I knew what real love was. It wasn't secrecy. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't something that could be thrown away for a fleeting thrill. It was trust. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe in it again. A full year had passed since my life had shattered. And yet here I was, still standing. Still living. The pain had faded, replaced by something else, wisdom, maybe. The kind that comes from surviving the kind of betrayal that once seemed impossible to endure. I had let go of the anger. I had let go of the need for revenge. I had let go of them. Jack and Emily had become nothing more than ghosts from a past life. I no longer thought about where they were, what they were doing, or whether they regretted it. That wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I had moved on. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I sat outside my favorite cafe, sipping coffee and watching the world move around me. The past felt distant, like an old book I had finally closed. Then I heard a voice. "Chris?" I looked up and saw Lisa standing there, a small smile on her face. She looked different, lighter, freer. Just like me. "Lisa," I said, smiling back. "It's been a while." She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It has." We talked for a while, catching up like old friends. It was easy, natural. She told me about her kids, her job, the life she had built after leaving Jack. And I told her about mine, about how I had rebuilt, about how I had found peace. At one point, she hesitated. "Do you ever think about them?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, then shook my head. "No. Not anymore." Lisa smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Me either." For the first time in a long time, I felt something real, a quiet sense of contentment, of closure. Not because I had won. Not because they had lost. But because I had finally let go. The past didn't own me anymore. And as I sat there, talking with Lisa, watching the world continue on, I realized something. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's happiness. And I had finally found mine. The end.